Welcome to K-Pastors Roundtable. I'm your host, Alex. Today we have a very special guest in our studio for you, Dr. Sharon Kim. She is the professor at Cal State University Fullerton in sociology, and also her husband, Pastor David Kim. He has been pastoring church in Chatsworth for 25 years. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
I'm so glad you are able to join us today.
Thank you so much for inviting us to participate. We're looking forward to the conversation.
Great to be here.
Okay, so let me start with Dr. Kim and ask her about her background, about where she grew up, and if she immigrated from Korea or not.
Yes, actually, I was born in Korea, and I immigrated when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
Yes.
Where did you come to LA area? Or?
Yeah, so we settled in Los Angeles.
Okay, so
grew up here.
When you first came, was it like Koreatown area, or was it?
We actually first settled in Santa Monica, and we lived there for a few years, and then moved to the San Fernando Valley.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, the Santa Monica, when you first came, there wasn't that many Koreans in that area.
No, absolutely not. And I remember when I started in elementary school, they didn't even have ESL programs. Mm-hmm. And so they actually had me in a class it was a special education class. It was not an ESL program because they didn't know what to do with students who can't speak English.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you assimilate into?
Yeah, so that was kind of a traumatic experience, but I think it was just sort of, kind of being thrown into learning how to speak English at that very young age.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of like my story. When I first came, I was 10, and I was thrown into school.
Uh-huh.
There was no other Korean student. I didn't even know the alphabet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so first day I go to school and they're talking to me and I don't know what they're saying. So I would stand still in the corner and then the teacher would come and hold me and take me to classes and stuff. I remember going through there for like a couple of weeks and I'm thinking, I need to go back.
Right.
I can't live here like this.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I mean, how long did it take you to assimilate into regular classes then?
Yeah, so the funny story is, I was in class. I think I was a first grader, and I couldn't speak any English. So the teachers didn't know what to do with me. So they thought maybe I was developmentally delayed. So they put me in a special education class.
Wow.
And most of the students there had Down syndrome.
Right.
And so I was in that class, and I would come home every day from school telling my parents something's wrong with my class.
Uh-huh.
Like something, I feel like I don't belong there.
Yes.
And they said, no, we immigrated to the United States for the best educational system. That's why we came. Don't complain. It's just different. But U.S. has the best educational system. And so I went to school like that every day. I think it was for months. Uh-huh. And I kept telling my parents, I don't think I belong in this class. And finally, a neighbor, went with me into that class. And she was an American woman to check out to see what was going on. And then she went in and realized, no, this was not the right class for me.
Wow.
Yeah, and then at that point, they pulled me back into a regular class. And I remember what my parents said. They said, Sharon, and my Korean name is Shinyeon, and they said, you have to make sure that you participate and speak, or else they might put you back in that other class. So maybe it was a fear motivation, but I just started, I started speaking a lot and making sure, that I learned English. So it was kind of a rocky start, to life in the United States. But that was my story.
When did you start enjoying school, let's say?
I can't really remember that, but I know maybe fourth or fifth grade, maybe in a couple years, I started feeling more settled and comfortable. Mm-hmm. And once I learned how to speak English as well.
Was there any other Koreans in school?
Oh, absolutely not. Actually, my sisters were there.
Oh, okay.
So it was me and my two older sisters at the school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did they put in the same special class too?
No, because they had more of an outgoing personality.
Oh, okay.
I tend to be a little more, introverted. Uh-huh. And so I was just scared and shy. And I think the teachers didn't really know how to interpret that.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. And then you went to Berkeley for your undergrad.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And was it because, most Korean parents always emphasize going to the best school that you can.
Uh-huh.
And so was it because of that reason, or did you choose the Berkeley to go to?
Yeah, in high school, I really didn't have much like counseling in terms of college counseling, and just some friends said, oh, I think Berkeley's a good school. And so that's pretty much that was pretty much my story. I applied to a few schools and I got into that one and chose it. Yeah.
And then you got your master's at UCLA.
Yes.
So you came back home. Then I'm assuming your parents still lived in the Santa Monica area, or
No, by that time by master's level we had moved to the Santa Clarita Valley.
Oh, okay.
So when I came back home, we were living in Saugus.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. And then you went cross town.
Right.
And got your PhD at USC.
Yes.
So you're going to rival school to rival school to rival school.
Yes, yes. But my loyalty is with my undergraduate institution.
Yeah, first love, I guess.
I think so. Yes.
Okay, and then now you start in your thesis and stuff. All has to do with the Korean American.
Right.
And so, why did you choose that area of study to focus on?
Right. So I always choose research topics that I'm passionate about that also intersect with my life in some personal way. And so Christianity and my relationship with God is huge, and also church and second generation spirituality, something that I felt was really important. And what was interesting is we had started a church, my husband and I, when I started my master's at UCLA.
Oh, okay.
And so I know I had to pick a thesis and then eventually a dissertation at USC. And I felt that this is a topic, not only was it relevant to me personally, it was important and something I felt very passionate about. And I hoped that my research would also help pastors, be a resource to them and not just an intellectual, like a research project.
Okay.
Yes.
So, was there a mentor that you looked after in terms of doing the studies, or it's just personal choice? I'm going to study this area.
I think it was just a personal choice, and it was something that was important to me. And I had good research mentors at USC, faculty members who came alongside me, sociologists of religion, who helped me with the research.
And doing my research, I'm finding out that you also published a book based on this.
Yes,
Right?
Right.
So how did you come about actually going to write a book about, second generation Koreans?
Right. So the dissertation was finished, and the dissertation, was a life work. It took many, many years getting this done. And my advisors, said this is a work that's, worthy to be published as a book. And so they helped me and, mentored me through that process to find the publishers. It was Rutgers University Press that published the book. And so that was a wonderful opportunity.
So did you do much interviews after you wrote the book? Or did you get a lot of calls from second generation pastors, or?
Yes, I've had a few. Yes, I have. And whoever wants to, learn from it, I'm always open. I was always open to share what I learned, and that it would be a service to them as they do God's work.
Okay. So let's delve a little bit more into your book itself.
Sure.
So main thesis is of a second-gen Korean church.
Yes.
And so what were you finding when you're doing the studies in the area?
Right. Well, I looked at this research took place over a span of 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and I looked at 22 different churches in Los Angeles, and these are churches that are entirely independent. So these are not English ministries within first-generation churches. Rather, these are independent churches.
Okay.
And so my research really focused on 4 questions, right? The first question is what motivated these second generation? And when I say second generation, I'm also including 1.5 generation.
Okay.
So what was it that motivated these second generation pastors to leave the immigrant church to start their own churches? So that was one big question.
Wow, okay.
And the second question is, what do these new churches look like, right? Yeah. And how do their multiple identities as children of immigrants, as racial minorities, as Christians, and as Korean Americans shape the way they practice religion? That was the second big question. And the third question is, how are these new churches engaging with the larger community outside of its boundaries, right? Yes. And then the final question, which I probably spent the most time on, is how are these churches evolving in terms of their racial and ethnic composition? Okay. So do they want to remain primarily a Korean American church for forever into the future? Or do they want to become an Asian American church? Or do they want to be a multiracial church?
Right. Okay.
Right.
So since you brought up the 4 points, so I'll go down the list and ask you, why did they leave Korean churches to become EM pastors of,
Right.
independent churches.
Yes. So I interviewed, several, 22 actually pastors, and their motivations to start. And there are many, of course, there are varied reasons, right? But if I can narrow it down to two sort of most common reasons that they stated, the first reason was they felt that the immigrant congregation in some ways was modeling a negative spirituality for their children. And by that, I mean, there's many examples that they gave. But one of the examples that came up over and over again is that the political fighting within, that's something that was repeated over and over again. And also I conducted surveys with all of the second generation who attended these new churches and found that almost 60% of them have experienced a church split growing up. Right. And so those not only we could just think in terms of numbers, but they had stories. Right. So individuals, and I heard all of their stories, and they're painful stories. Yes. And they were able to witness with their own eyes some of the things that happened in these church splits. And those things made a negative impact on their hearts. It wounded them. Wow. And really create a negative imprint of what spirituality, what Christian life, even of God. Right. So I think the second generation pastors I spoke with, brought that up. Yes. Yeah. And then another example that they gave that they shared was that the first generation had a real overemphasis on academic and economic achievement. Yes. And they prioritized that even above spiritual growth. Right. And so they were feeling this kind of tension with the parents' generation, first generation, because here they are trying to minister to the second generation and telling them to put God first. Right. And yet they felt that the first generation was not really prioritized.
That's one of the more common comments that I get back when I interview. But on the other side, I always tell the EM kids is that you have to understand background of your parents.
Absolutely.
Like my mother always emphasized that. But the only reason she did was because in Korea when she was growing up, they didn't have much.
Right.
Your grandparents first thing they ask you is, did you eat?
Yes.
And after a while, you're thinking, why are they asking me if I ate? It's not very important to me, whether I ate or not. But they grew up in an era where they didn't have much food. Right. And so it was the most important part of them in conveying their love to you, saying, did you eat? Right. So that's one. And then the parents, my parents grew up in an era where education is thought to be the number one source having a good jobs, more secure jobs, and more, in the society, at the level that they want their children to live. So they emphasize that over and over, not because they think it's only, but that's the experience that they had when they were growing up. And so I always try to explain, you have to understand the other side in order for you to grow, because if you don't understand the other side, why they're saying it, then you will never change. You are stuck whatever you thinking that you have. Mm-hmm. And so that's the unfortunate part. I wish more pastors would address those issues and address them in the sense that making sense of why they're focusing that way. Right. Yeah. So
I think that's absolutely right. I think that's a wise way of perspective, because I think what I'm hearing you say is it's motivated by the parents' genuine love and concern. Right. And based on the parents' location and what they've been through and the context that they grew up in, that's the best way they want to experience love to their children.
Yeah, but at time to time, I hear stories of parents going through the Korean War. Right. So my parents' generation went through that war, and we're talking about eating maybe once a day or once every 2 days. Yes. And so in that struggle, they don't want their children to have that kind of experience. Right. And so they are saying stuff they can only understand in their mind. Say, if you get a good education, if you become the top of your class, you're going to do better than me. You're not going to go through the suffering that I've gone through.
Right.
And so that's the other side of it that I wish
Yes.
that all the EM kids would understand.
Yes,
so
I
it's
think
not
so.
it's not coming from wanting to put you down, but rather
No, yeah.
They're-
So I think my research is giving voice to the second generation pastors. And I state that in the book as well, that I did not interview too many first generation pastors.
Right.
And I think perhaps that could be a next research project. But for this project, I wanted to give voice to the second generation pastor's perspective. So I state that there is a bias there. And I think the second generation pastors, from their perspective, that their primary goal is to help the young ones grow spiritually.
Yes.
That's the number one goal. They're not educators, right? They're not college counselors. They're pastors.
Yes.
And so I think one example that comes to mind is one pastor shared at a revival meeting.
Yes.
It was a fantastic revival meeting, and several of the younger students made the commitment to pursue full-time ministry
Yes.
and become pastors.
Wow.
But then the parents found out about that.
Yes.
So they were not happy about that at
Yes,
all.
I could imagine.
And they were really upset.
Yes.
And so in their mind, they want their children to love God and grow spiritually, but not too much, not go crazy, And so they talked to the pastor and said, we are against this. And some of the parents were elders of the churches,
Right.
And so I think the second generation pastors felt like there's some level of,
Yeah.
disconnect.
Right. I mean, that actually happened to me when I was in Florida.
Yes.
I was pastoring church in Florida, Korean church, and this one student, he was medical school. He was in the medical school and he was going through the program. And then I sent him to a mission trip to Haiti. He came back. He dropped out of medical school and he went to the seminary. His father was the elder of the church.
Right.
And for a second, I thought he's going to go ballistic on me.
Yeah.
But God bless his heart. I mean, after praying for a while, he came back and said,
That's wonderful.
that's the choice that God has made for him.
Yes.
And he will accept it.
Right.
But I mean, that's one of the struggles, I guess, second generation, first generation is, which is more important, in terms of future of their child or children and the path that they take in their life. Anyway, right now I'm talking with Dr. Kim. So anyway, let's go back to your second
reason.
Yeah, reason for the book you said was you found out.
So the second reason was why they left the church, right?
Right.
The second reason is they felt it revolved around leadership issues, leadership philosophies and styles.
Yes.
And many of the second generation pastors, like for instance, one pastor said, what he hungered for was mentorship from the senior pastor.
Yes.
The Korean pastor,
Yes.
speaking pastor. So that's what he hungered for. But as he was working, he realized that the senior pastor saw him as an employee.
Yes.
And so there was a disconnect there
Yes.
in terms of the type of relationship that he wanted. So anyhow, second generation pastors, it's in that vein, that type of level of disappointment, level of I'm not being mentored, I'm not being fathered, I'm not being heard.
Yes.
My voice is not important.
Yes.
And so these types of issues started bubbling and increasing.
I feel like I'm a spokesperson for this first generation.
Well, that's good.
Usually KM pastors, they planted a church or they are leadership by themselves. There's no team ministry in KM.
Right.
And so whenever another pastor comes in the picture, they always think of them as their employees or not in the same sense of team ministry. And so I found many of the KM pastors have difficulty in team ministry type of concept.
Right.
Whereas the second generation
That's
pastors,
what they hunger for.
Yes, that's what they look for and that's what they seek, but they're not finding in KM. So I totally understand,
Right.
why that they would feel that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the motivations that sort of propel them out to leave the immigrant church, primarily I think it revolves around these two issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you said in your book, the most important point that you found was what? What was the most important in your research?
Right. Well, I'm coming at this from a sociologist of religion
Yes.
also. So in the past, immigrants, there was a first generation when they first came, they would have their own churches in their native language.
Right.
But by the second generation, usually when they speak English, they will go into mainstream churches.
Yes.
Right? But for what's unique about what's happening in our context today is that the second generation Korean pastors are not joining mainstream churches.
Okay.
In my research, at
Right,
least,
right.
but they're forming their own churches.
Right.
And within their own churches, they're fashioning their own identity
Yes.
of what it looks like to be a Christian and be children of immigrants, to be Korean Americans, to be Asian American, these multiple identities,
Yes.
how it expresses itself in their faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I coin a term, and it's called a hybrid spirituality.
Okay.
And that these churches are hybrid third spaces,
Yes.
and they're forming a hybrid spirituality. So that's sort of my central research argument. No?
But when you're researching, are you finding success in that area, or
Right.
is it successful or is it not successful, or
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening
Right.
when they went to build up a church like that?
Right. So at the time that I finished the formal aspect of my research that I knew of, there were about 56 churches that were doing well for the most part. Now, today, I don't know exactly how many churches there are, second-generation churches.
Okay.
Yeah. I do know that there are some who are doing very well. There are some churches that close down as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is a process of growth and experimentation and something new that's happening. Yeah.
Churches, do you think the reason for closure, is it because of membership issues or is it financial issues? Do you know? I mean, any kind of guesses why
Yeah,
that is the case?
I'm thinking of a few top of my mind, and I think it is membership issues.
Okay.
You know, they might have stayed as a small church for a while,
Yes.
and maybe felt that this time we need to disband
Okay.
and join other ministries. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I personally know a couple of churches that started in the living room of
Right.
pastor's house.
Right.
And so they grew
Uh-huh.
about 30, 40, and so they went outside, but then they were never able to maintain that number outside, and they ended up ultimately closing
Closing
down.
the church. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an issue that I guess the second generation pastors have,
Right.
trying to maintain the church.
Right.
So, but anyway, so any other books that you have in mind that you're going to write or research?
future? Well, right now I'm doing research. It's entirely different topic, but I'm doing research on the role of religion in fostering resilience among genocide survivors in Rwanda.
Wow.
So I've been traveling to Rwanda for, it's been 4 times now, doing research and building relationships and really doing mission work as well. So I've published and written things about that, and so that's my new research agenda.
Is there any correlation with the Korean churches you saw versus what's happening in Rwanda?
Oh,
or-
absolutely, yeah. And what it is it's an outflow of what's happening. Because I see myself as a researcher, but more importantly, I see myself as a minister of God. You know,
Yes.
and as a Christian, that's my passion.
Okay.
Right? That's my passion, is to serve God and to build disciples. And I think we're going to talk about that later as
Yes,
well.
yes.
But the research that I'm doing in Rwanda was an outflow of what God is doing through our church.
Okay.
So there is a connection there.
The church that you started with your husband, has it grown since
Yes,
you planted in the beginning?
Yes.
So how small was it in the beginning, and then where are you now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started 25 years ago, and we started with a group of 12 UCLA students. And we started in our living room as well, just like you were
Okay.
sharing. So we started very small. It's been 25 years. We're about 500 now.
Wow.
It's called the Garden Church. It's in Chatsworth.
Is it primarily Koreans, or is it multi-ethnic, or?
We're moving towards multi-ethnic, and that's where we sense God is moving us. I'd say right now we're about 50% Korean
Wow.
and maybe 30% Asian.
Okay.
And then 20% non-Asian.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you think that trend will continue and
That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing. The past couple of years, if we look at all the visitors that have come to our church, majority of them are non-Asian.
Wow.
Right. So they're people coming from our neighborhood and our community. So when we, because we're keeping records, and majority of them are non-Asians that are visiting every year.
I mean, I'm so glad that your church is growing that way. Is there any one or two particular things that you think you emphasize at the church that's helping the growth of your church?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we've really emphasized from the very beginning is the scriptural reality that we're all ministers.
Yes.
The priesthood of all believers. So we believe that strongly. So we really want to instill in our people that God has a calling. God has gifted you with spiritual gifts. Yes. So we're working together as a family and as a team together to build God's kingdom and to advance his mission. And you have a part to play. It's not just pastors.
Right.
We're all priesthood of all believers. So we really come alongside people to help them discover that and to own that identity. So I think that's been a big part of our value.
Okay. And then going back to the academics, do you see many second-generation Korean kids in the school system that come through the sociology department, or
in my sociology department?
Yes.
Do I see many Korean Americans there?
Yes.
Not too many.
Really?
Yeah, not too many. But there are a few. And they do find me because they know that I'm a, Korean American.
Right.
And so I will mentor them. Yes.
Well, why do you think that is? I mean, because usually, like science major, there's a lot of Korean kids in there.
Right.
But socialists, you don't find too many Korean kids in there.
Right. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Does it have to do anything to the money that
money?
they get?
I was going to say that. That could be the reason that maybe they feel that that's not a lucrative major, that it's not going to get them a high-paying job, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, because my father was a professor, and he spent many hours researching.
What was his discipline?
Newspaper and radio.
Oh, wow.
And
you're doing it too.
Yeah, and so I'm in this field.
Wonderful.
Not because of him, but
yes.
I've been always around that. But I remember helping him do research and taking 3-4 months surveying Korean churches. He was into also trying to find out issues with the Korean churches.
Right.
And so he would pass out these questionnaires, and then when he brings back home, we all sit down and we start checking off little charts.
You were his research assistants.
And he always said, not too many Korean kids are in this field.
Right.
Because the amount of work it requires to do this.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of the first half an hour with Dr. Kim and Pastor Kim. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Okay, and hopefully we'll be back tomorrow with the other half, or, the more exciting news. Okay, thank you so much. K-Pastors Roundtable is a discussion program for today's Korean Americans and Christians. We will discuss the current issues and important issues involving our community. Your participation is very important. You can send in your questions or comments via our email, kprt316@gmail.com. We hope you will actively participate. Panels of the K-Pastors Roundtables are Ray Chang, Senior Pastor of Ambassador Church, Charles Che, Lead Pastor of Tapestry LA Church, Ed Choi, Lead Pastor of Thanksgiving Church. K-Pastors Roundtable can be heard on AM 1190 in Southern California at 1:30 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. We also have a YouTube channel. You can search K-Pastors Roundtable and find us.